They keep arriving at this main hospital in Gaza. They've been taking in casualties here every day since the operation started.
There seems to have been that the convoy was ambushed from the front and from the back.
The bodies of at least 18 passengers are still out here somewhere in these fields.
That red brick building is the hospital where the first victim was diagnosed and died.
Staff are now handing these out because, of course, the fear is they don't know what's happened and they think it may be a chemical attack.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
When I got the opportunity to pick the international guest of honor for this night, with this audience of the most respected journalists in Sweden, I turned to a man who maybe has the toughest job in the media industry. So he is a former reporter who is fluent in Mandarin, who has worked as a speechwriter to the Japanese cabinet secretary, who has launched Financial Times in Shanghai, and he has been the chief editor of the Times. And he also has been fired from the job by Rupert Murdoch. Welcome, James Harding.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sit there. So you are the director of BBC News and Current Affairs. So what was your first reaction when you were asked to come to BBC?
I think I didn't really know what I was letting myself in for, because it's such an extraordinary organisation. And a friend of mine told me that the feeling that I'd have when I walked over the threshold, walked into the building, would be extraordinary, and he was right. And I didn't appreciate it until, funnily enough, I'd got the job, and I walked in, and you suddenly realised that you were a journalist working in the BBC. And I should just tell you something about that change from newspapers to the BBC. In the UK, when they do measures of trust, a newspaper journalist commands the trust of about 13% of the UK population, and a BBC journalist commands the trust of about 56% of the population. And so personally, it was a great moment of change for me. I became a much more trustworthy and reliable person. Exactly.
So, but were you scared? Were you surprised? Did you ask yourself, why me? I mean, do you it's a tough job.
Look, firstly, let's not beat around the bush. It's an amazing honour to get to do these jobs, the work in places like this. And so moving into a place like the BBC, which some of you may know had really been through what's the best way of describing it, in the tumble dryer. We'd been really turned around in the previous couple of years. It was clearly going to be a difficult job. It has a singular responsibility, and it had come under extraordinary scrutiny. And the difficulty for a newsroom when everyone is watching your every move is that you can lose the confidence, the appetite for the difficult story. So I knew it would be difficult.
Would you say that the self-confidence of the organization was quite weak?
Actually, what's really impressed me was that it has the ability to keep going. I mean, I think that's the thing about great news organizations. Weirdly, it's easy when you're breaking the big stories, when you're delivering extraordinary scoops, and you've got the wind at your back. Actually, it's easy to work in a newsroom. When your competitors are beating you, when you're being criticized in public, actually just to keep focused on the story, that's the real test of a newsroom. And actually the BBC has that.
It goes for Sweden as well.
Good.
Can assure you. Now, after 6 months, was BBC News what you thought it would be?
Shall I tell everyone or not? Yes. I feel like I'm part of a magic show, currently being undressed. Thank you very much. Was it what I thought? Yes, in some senses, in that it's a curious thing. You know, the culture of news in the UK is a little like this. Fleet Street, which is where the newspapers are, is like the back of the class in a classroom. You know, it's where the naughty kids are. You know, they're
naughty
smoking,
boys, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
They're smoking and they're doodling on their exercise books. And the BBC, the broadcasters, are a bit like the front of the class. You know, they're the kids.
The good girls.
Oh, I know the answer. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like that. And so culturally, it was really interesting and trying to understand why it is that the BBC commands greater levels of trust. What do you need to do on accuracy, on impartiality, on fairness to make sure you get that public trust? But then also, how do you tell stories in television and radio, but particularly in television, in ways that are obviously not possible as I'd experienced as a newspaper reporter. So let's face it, I've been learning a lot.
When starting at the BBC, you were asked to present a strategy, and you said, like, you know, what about just getting some stories?
Yes.
So why did you say that?
Well, that was genuinely my answer. I got asked, what's your strategy for BBC News? And I said, my strategy is to get some stories, because I think that...
And people loved you when you said it.
I loved or laughed at me, or maybe both.
Loved
oh,
it.
I think...
Because that's what the journalist is dreaming of. I mean, what about editing? What about, you know, figures and economy, just getting some stories? And that's what you said.
Well, I think, you know, at the Times, we'd lived through some really big changes. One of them was, of course, moving the paper onto the iPad. The other one was the paywall, which some of you may have followed the controversy around that. And one of the big lessons I learned was you have to make those changes. You have to be improving and innovating. But if you take your eye off the ball of the news, you lose your audience. And curiously, when you're breaking stories, when you're properly investigating and explaining what's happening, the audience will come with you, whatever platform you're on. And so I was quite keen to make sure that the BBC, given the scale of changes we're all going through, was really focused on getting after the news. And leaning into the news, examining it, you know, investigating it. Since then, I have to confess, I've discovered that I really do need to come up with a strategy, so I've had to work on that too.
But did you have the feeling that BBC were quite weak on getting the stories, that the news, that Fleet Street had a better case there?
I think that I've learned quite a lot about what breaking stories are actually at the BBC. You can do things as a broadcaster, and you know, our setup is that we're both television and radio and of course online, that you can break stories in broadcasting in ways that you can't dream of in newspapers. If you book the right person, if you ask them the right question, you can reveal a great deal. Thank you very much. You can reveal a great deal. So I think that there are things that you can do in terms of breaking stories that's possible in broadcasting that I hadn't appreciated. I think the one thing that is true, though, is when you want to do a serious piece of investigation, you really need time. And you usually need more time than you expect. And we live in this curious world where part of what the news is about today is immediacy. Part of it is about being live, telling people exactly what we know is going on right now. But part of it is taking much more time than we think and having the patience and discipline to wait until the story's ready. And for television, that's even more true than it is for print because you have to wait to get the pictures. Radio lives somewhere in between, I think.
So now you have presented a vision for BBC News, and you're talking about the fourth revolution. First it was radio, then television, and then online. Tell us, what is the fourth revolution to BBC?
Well, we were started, the BBC started in 1922, and the question was, how could a news organisation operate in the public square with the power of broadcasting? At the time it was radio. The BBC drove that revolution in the UK. It then drove television news, and it then, 20 years or so ago, started driving what was happening online. I think that we can all see now that, for want of a better word, mobile is another form of revolution in news. And the reason is that it's a form of power in the news that's different from any other. It's a form of power that lives not just in the hands of the newsroom, but also in the hands of people who receive and respond to the news. And how we actually drive that, enjoy it, really enjoy it, enjoy the relationship that we now have with people that we used to think of as our audiences or our readers. That's extremely exciting to me, and I think gives us all the chance to do what we came into this business for in the first place, which is to get closer to the real story. We have now the possibility to use our audience as a giant fact-checking machine. When I joined the BBC, and I was, padding around trying to find the coffee machine, and learning my way around this organization, I said rather grandly, one of the amazing things we have is this team of 3,000 people worldwide, and they can reach out and distribute the news. And someone said, no, you're missing the point. We have 250 million people around the world who can actually inform us, who can help be sources and fact checkers. And so that relationship is the essential one.
Exactly. How do you receive all this information, or how do you, get it?
Yeah, I think that's the. There's this French artist, isn't there, who's spending a couple of days literally trying to find a needle in the haystack, and of course that's the job for all of us. The risk is that we are, by profession and by nature, optimists about the future of news, and actually we look at what's happening to our industry and we miss the point. And the point is that there's so much information out there. The politics has become so loud and so shrill that celebrities are able to email or tweet you directly, that companies have these big communications departments, and the impact on the individual is that there's just too much noise, there's just too much information, and that the irony of the information age is that we feel misinformed or ill-informed or disinformed. And that makes me feel as though that's the real task of news, and it gets back to the essential business of going out, reporting what's happened, editing it down into a concise package, story, bulletin, and putting it out there and engaging with the audience. Curiously, I think we go back to our roots as a result of that, but in clearly new formats and on new devices.
Yesterday, Jonas Bonnier gave a dinner with representatives from public service, from commercial TV, from print, and you were astonished, weren't you?
Well, it was the point is the idea of the entire sort of the hub of the UK media industry sitting happily, quietly, drinking, toasting each other, and being quite so polite was really impressive to me. Funnily enough, one of the things that I realised I've never been to a journalistic award ceremony in a language that I don't speak, and I should say it's extremely moving. It's like watching an opera. The anticipation, the delight, the polite frustration with the results, and I was thinking to myself that I recently appointed a great woman called Fiona Campbell to be the head of current affairs at the BBC. And after I'd appointed her, we went out for lunch, and she said, "There's something I have to tell you." And I thought, oh, in our job, that can mean a host of really quite colourful things. She said, "You don't know this, but once at an award ceremony, I got drunk and I punched the head of World News." I thought, oh, that's fine. That's not, in the list of problems I've got, that's not a problem. And I should just say, to give you a sense of how the UK media works, that involves punching someone that you work with. That's not even someone you work against. So it can be quite combative, the UK media scene.
Could you describe this nasty climate?
I think the serious issue for the BBC is that we are, like you, funded by the licence fee. And that means that we are there to serve everybody. And actually, the measure of success is that given every home pays for us, we must serve every home. And this is very hard for some commercial competitors to deal with. And the consequence is you can, if you work in the BBC, feel as though you're operating at the centre of a circular firing squad. And the firing squad has a range of politicians over here, parts of the rest of the press over there, some of the people that you work with over here, and that's before you get to the public, who are the ones who have a legitimate place in terms of making a complaint. So living in that environment and not being defensive, endlessly thinking, actually, you know what, we're paid for by the public. Every single member of the public, whether in the politics, the press, or in the audience, have the right, absolutely, to question and criticize what we do, and still to operate with a degree of confidence and determination.
But being a newspaper man...
By the way, I feel slightly silly, I should just say, having this conversation with Eva. The reason I'm here, just so you know, is because we at the BBC would like to salute what you've done here at SVT. We think that you have shown extraordinary stewardship of SVT, and that we look at it with admiration and with respect and with a certain amount of envy from time to time. And I would just like to say I feel a little silly giving some speech about public service broadcasting to you, Eva.
But you know, there are commercial people here as well.
So it's good to tell them?
Yeah,
okay,
they
fine,
can hear,
all right.
they can listen. Thank you. So, what exactly happened when you suddenly left the Times?
I was the editor of the Times for 5 years. I'd been at the Financial Times for 11 years before that. And it was a very it was a very difficult and complicated time, the last 6-7 years in the UK media business, but particularly if you were working for a newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch at the time when the phone hacking story blew up. And the Times has, and genuinely has, editorial independence. And we, as a newspaper, did what I still think was the right thing. We reported out the phone hacking story very thoroughly. And in the editorial columns of the paper, the editorials that obviously I either edited or wrote each day, we were critical of the company and its culture. Now, I should say there are a great number of people who have made either a habit or a living out of criticizing Rupert Murdoch. And, you know, therefore, the flaws and failings, I think, are well known. To be clear, Rupert Murdoch is a serious man when it comes to the news. He's interested in the world, he believes deeply in journalism, and he's invested in news, in newspapers, and in journalists. And I say that having had the disagreements we had, and having had to have left the paper, which I loved. I think that looking at the commitment he's made over 30-odd years to the Times, it's really important to stress what a committed proprietor he's been.
But is he calling every day? I mean, does he read the newspaper every day?
Yeah, he reads the newspaper every day. He's not calling every day. What happened, you know, we had a number of disagreements. The disagreements, you know, I think it's no secret, he was unhappy with the way in which the paper had covered the phone hacking story. I think he probably felt that I was too liberal an editor for his taste. And you know, one of the things that I've learned is that if the proprietor and the editor disagree, the proprietor doesn't leave. So you know, and to be serious about it, you know, the proprietor, you know, I was very sad to go. I believed in what we were doing, and a news organisation can get a certain momentum, and we were at a stage where we had a great momentum in the news. We'd covered some stories that I thought really mattered on child sex exploitation, on tax avoidance. We were running some campaigns on cycling, on adoption. And so it was a very painful thing, but I still think that it's important to stress that here is a proprietor who, both in the UK and if you look at what's happening with the Wall Street Journal, has kept on investing in journalism and believes in the business of setting out to report the news. And so I know there's been a great deal of criticism, and I've been on the end of it.
But it's an exciting figure. It's almost unbelievable. So looking at the track record, being a top manager at BBC, that also seems to be a rather risky position.
Yes, I think that's right.
Have you already had your first public fight?
We've had a few. I mean, I think that
You'll get them.
you'll get them. I think the difficulty is, you know, and again, Ava, you know this better than anyone, there is going to be a level of noise around what a publicly funded newsroom does. That's just going to happen. And there is a trick, isn't there, to making sure that you keep some sense of perspective, given the very, very difficult jobs that other people do, the real life and death jobs that other people do, that you don't lose sight of what a kind of media circus is and what a real problem is. And it is also the case that more likely than not...
That's really important.
Yeah, and more likely than not, there is going to be some point where you have to stand up and say, look, this was not my doing, but it is my responsibility, and take the consequences of it. I feel slightly lucky, having just been through the experience I've been through at the Times. I've got some practice in leaving organisations I love. so I'm prepared for that as and when it happens.
So finally, let me share something with you. Having been responsible for SVT for 8 years, I wake up every morning and I'm ready for a crisis. I'm ready for the big catastrophe. And I'm really, going to my daily job in that kind of mood.
Yeah.
That is a burden. Do you feel the same thing?
The presumption there, of course, is that you've slept through the night. The worry that the thing that woke you up at 3 in the morning hasn't kept you up until 6:30. I find that there are real issues about managing the stress of public scrutiny. One of them is having a team that can help you through that, because in the end, it's that team that's going to make sense of it all and get it right. And the other one is trying to make sure that when there is a problem, you get on top of it extremely fast so that you work out whether it's a real one or whether it's a political problem, a commercial problem, or just a problem of someone else's imagination. And we get a few of those.
And that's the most of the problems. They're just not problems 2 days later. Thank you so much, James, for coming to Stockholm.
Thank you.